no longer human. Forward. I have seen 3 photographs of that man. One is of him in his childhood, presumably around 10 years old, surrounded by a large number of women, who I imagine to be his sisters, cousins, and so on. In the photo, he stands by a pond in a garden, wearing rough striped trousers, tilting his head about 30 degrees to the left, and smiling grotesquely. Grotesque? However, dull people, that is, those who have no interest in beauty or ugliness, might casually say, "What a cute little boy," without realizing how insincere that compliment sounds. There is a certain level of what one might call ordinary cuteness in the child's smile, but anyone who has gone through even a little training regarding beauty and ugliness would immediately whisper with great displeasure, "What a horrible child," and might throw the photo away as if brushing off a caterpillar. Indeed, the more one looks at that child's smile, the more it evokes something indescribably unpleasant and eerie. In reality, it isn't a smile at all. This child isn't smiling in the slightest. As evidence, this child stands with both fists tightly clenched. Humans cannot smile while clenching their fists. It's like the smile of a monkey, just a hideous wrinkle on the face. One might even feel compelled to call him Wrinkly Boy. The expression in that photo is truly bizarre, somewhat filthy, and makes one feel strangely nauseated. I had never seen a child with such a peculiar expression before. The second photograph shows a face that has undergone a shockingly terrible transformation. It is of him as a student. Whether it's from his high school or university days is unclear, but in any case, it's a remarkably handsome student. Yet, strangely enough, it didn't feel like a living person at all. Dressed in a student uniform, with a white handkerchief peeking from his breast pocket, sitting in a wicker chair with his legs crossed, he is also smiling. This smile is not that of a wrinkled monkey but rather a somewhat skillful grin. However, it still differs from a human smile. One might say it lacks the weight of blood, or perhaps the bitterness of life. There is no sense of fulfillment at all. Instead, it feels light as a feather, like a piece of blank paper, simply smiling. In other words, it has the feel of being entirely fabricated. It's not just pretentious, it's insufficient to say it's frivolous, or smirking, or stylish. Moreover, upon closer inspection, one feels something eerily strange about this handsome student as well. I had never seen a young man with such a mysterious beauty. The third photograph is the most bizarre. It is almost impossible to determine the age. His hair seems somewhat gray. In the corner of a terribly dirty room, the walls are visibly crumbling in 3 places. He holds both hands over a small brazier and isn't smiling this time. There is no expression at all. It can be said that he looks as if he is naturally dying while sitting there, a truly dreadful and ominous photograph. What's strange is that because the photo shows his face quite large, I could closely examine the structure of that face. The forehead is ordinary, the wrinkles on the forehead are ordinary, the eyebrows are ordinary, the eyes are ordinary, the nose, mouth, and chin are all ordinary. This face has not only no expression but also no impression. There are no features. For example, when I look at this photo and close my eyes, I have already forgotten that face. I can recall the walls of the room and the small brazier, but the impression of the protagonist of that room vanishes like mist, and I cannot remember it at all. It's a face that wouldn't even make it as a painting. It wouldn't work even as a caricature. Opening my eyes again, I think, so this was the face, and there is no joy in that realization. To put it extremely, even after opening my eyes and looking at that photo again, I still cannot recall it. And it simply makes me uncomfortable and irritated, leading me to want to turn my eyes away. Even the so-called death-like appearance should have some expression or impression, but if one were to attach the neck of a useless horse to a human body, it would probably feel something like this. In any case, it evokes a sense of dread in the viewer, making one feel uneasy. I had never seen such a strange man's face before. First memoir. I have led a life full of shame. I have no grasp of what human life is. I was born in a rural area of Tohoku, and I didn't see a train until I was quite old. When I went up and down the bridge at the station, I had no idea it was built to cross the tracks. I thought it was simply there to make the station's premises complex and enjoyable, like a foreign amusement park. And I held that belief for a long time. Going up and down the bridge seemed to me to be quite an elegant game. I thought it was one of the most thoughtful services in the railway experience, but later I discovered it was merely a very practical staircase for passengers to cross the tracks, and I suddenly lost interest. As a child, I saw subways in picture books and thought they were not created out of practical necessity, but simply because riding underground was a more interesting game than riding above ground. Since childhood, I had been sickly and often bedridden. While lying in bed, I deeply considered the coverings of sheets, pillowcases, and blankets as mere trivial decorations. It wasn't until I was nearly 20 that I realized they were surprisingly practical items, and I felt a deep sadness about the futility of human life. Moreover, I had no understanding of hunger. No, I don't mean that I grew up in a household without food, but rather that I had no idea what the sensation of hunger was. It may sound strange, but even when my stomach was empty, I was completely unaware of it. When I returned from elementary or middle school, the people around me would say, "You must be hungry. We remember how awful it was to come home from school, or how about some sweet red beans? We also have castella and bread," and so forth. I would then, using my natural inclination to flatter, murmur that I was hungry and toss 10 sweet red beans into my mouth, yet I never understood what hunger truly felt like. Of course, I ate a lot, but I hardly remember eating out of hunger. I ate things that were considered rare or luxurious, and when I visited others, I usually forced myself to eat what was offered. In fact, the most painful moments of my childhood were truly during mealtime at home. In my rural home, the family of about 10 would sit facing each other with their individual meals arranged in 2 rows. As the youngest child, I of course sat at the very end. The dining room was dimly lit, and during lunch, seeing the family silently eating their meals always made me feel a chill. Moreover, since it was an old-fashioned rural house, the side dishes were mostly the same, and I could not hope for anything unusual or luxurious, so I began to dread mealtime even more. Sitting at the end of that dimly lit room, shivering in the cold, I would slowly bring rice to my mouth, pondering why humans had to eat 3 meals a day. Everyone ate with such solemn faces, and I thought it was a kind of ritual, gathering at a set time in a dark room, properly arranging our meals, and chewing silently while looking down, perhaps to pray for the spirits that roamed around the house. The saying that you will die if you don't eat only sounded like an unpleasant scare to me. That superstition, which still seems like superstition to me, always filled me with anxiety and fear. The words that humans must eat to live and must work to eat were for me incredibly difficult to understand, obscure, and had a threatening resonance. In short, it seems I still do not understand human activities at all. There is a sense of anxiety that my notion of happiness is completely misaligned with that of all other people. Because of this anxiety, I have often tossed and turned at night, groaning and even coming close to madness. Am I really happy? Since childhood, I have often been told that I was fortunate, but I have always felt like I was in hell, and those who called me fortunate appeared to me to be living a much more comfortable life, so much so that they could not be compared to me at all. I felt like I had 10 lumps of misfortune, and I thought that if even one of them were placed on my neighbor's back, it would be enough to take their life. In other words, I do not understand. I have no idea about the nature and extent of my neighbor's suffering. There are practical sufferings, where simply eating would solve the problem, however, that might be the most intense agony, far surpassing my 10 misfortunes, a horrifying abyss of suffering that I cannot comprehend. Yet, despite that, how is it that people do not commit suicide, go mad, debate politics, or despair? They must be able to continue the struggle of life without pain, right? Have they become complete egoists, confident in it, never doubting themselves? If so, that would be easy. But perhaps everyone is like that, and that is perfectly fine. I don't know. At night, do they sleep soundly? In the morning, do they seem refreshed? What dreams are they having? What do they think about while walking down the road? Money? Surely, that can't be everything. I feel like I've heard the idea that humans live to eat, but I've never heard the phrase that they live for money. No, but it might depend on the situation. No, I don't understand that either. The more I think about it, the less I understand, and I am only beset by anxiety and fear, feeling like I am entirely different from others. I can hardly hold a conversation with my neighbors. I don't know what or how to say anything. So, I thought of becoming a clown. That was my last attempt to reach out to humanity. Even while I was extremely afraid of humans, it seems I could not completely let go of them. Thus, I was able to connect with humanity slightly on this clowning line. While constantly wearing a smile on the outside, internally I was desperate, living in a state that could be described as a hair-raising service on the verge of catastrophe. Since childhood, I have not been able to gauge the suffering of my family members, nor do I know what they think as they live. I was simply terrified of this awkwardness and could not bear it, so I had already become quite adept at being a clown. In other words, I had unwittingly become a child who never spoke a word of truth. Looking at photos taken during that time with my family, everyone else has serious faces, while I alone always distort my face into a strange grin. This was also a form of my young, sad clowning. I have never once responded to my relatives when they said something to me. That little scolding felt as strong to me as a thunderclap, driving me nearly mad. Far from replying, I believed that the scolding itself must be what could be called the truth of humanity, which has been passed down for generations. I lacked the power to act upon that truth, so I thought I could no longer live among humans. Therefore, I could not argue or defend myself. When someone spoke ill of me, it felt as if I was indeed making a terrible misunderstanding, and I always silently accepted that attack, feeling a terror so intense it drove me to madness. This might not be a pleasant experience for anyone to be criticized or scolded, but I see in the face of an angry person a nature more frightening than that of a lion, crocodile, or dragon. Although they seem to hide that nature most of the time, at some moment, like a cow peacefully lying in a field suddenly killing a fly with its tail, I would see the terrible true nature of humans exposed by their anger, and I would always feel a hair-raising chill, thinking that this nature might also be one of the qualifications for humans to live. In relation to humans, I am always shaking with fear, unable to have the slightest confidence in my own actions as a human, and I have buried my own anguish deep within a small box in my heart. I secretly concealed that melancholy and nervousness, trying to maintain a facade of innocent optimism, gradually evolving into a comical eccentric. I thought, I just have to make them laugh. If I do that, perhaps people won't mind that I am outside their so-called life. I mustn't be an eyesore to them. I am nothing, like the wind or the sky. That thought only grew stronger, So I made my family laugh through my clowning, and even offered desperate clowning services to the more incomprehensible and terrifying servants. In summer, I wore a red wool sweater under my yukata while walking in the hallway to make everyone in the house laugh. Even my eldest brother, who rarely laughed, burst out upon seeing it and said in an adorably playful tone, "That doesn't suit you, haha-chan." Well, I am not such a foolish eccentric as to wear a wool sweater in midsummer. I was wearing my sister's leg warmers on my arms, peeking out from the sleeves of my yukata, making it look like I was wearing a sweater. My father was a man who often had business in Tokyo, so he owned a villa in Ueno Sakuraigicho, where he spent most of the month. Whenever he returned home, it was almost his hobby to buy an excessive amount of souvenirs for his family and even for relatives. One night before my father went to Tokyo, he gathered the children in the guest room and asked each of us, laughing, what kind of souvenirs we would like him to bring back. He wrote down each child's answer in his notebook. It was rare for my father to be so friendly with the children. "What about Yōzō?" he asked me, and I hesitated to respond. When asked what I wanted, I suddenly felt like I didn't want anything at all. The thought that nothing could possibly make me happy crossed my mind. At the same time, I couldn't reject something given to me, no matter how much it didn't suit my taste. I felt a kind of fear, unable to say I didn't want something unpleasant, and even enjoyed the things I liked in a furtive manner, tasting bitterness in it. In other words, I lacked the power to choose between two options. This seemed to be one of the significant traits that later became a major cause of what I would call my shameful life. Because I remained silent and fidgeted, my father became a little annoyed and said, "So, you want a book, then?" There was a lion costume at the toy store in Asakusa, perfect for kids to wear and play with. "Don't you want it?" When he asked if I didn't want it, I felt defeated. I couldn't even make a silly response. I was a complete failure as a comedian. "A book would be good," my older brother said seriously. "I see," my father said, looking disappointed, and closed his notebook without writing anything down. What a failure. I had angered my father. Surely, his revenge would be terrible. I lay in bed that night, shivering, wondering if I could somehow make up for my mistake. Quietly, I got up and went to the guest room, opened the drawer of the desk where my father must have stored the notebook, took it out, flipped through the pages, found the spot for writing down the souvenirs, licked the pencil, and wrote "lion dance" before going back to bed. I didn't really want that lion costume. In fact, I would have preferred a book. However, I realized my father wanted to buy me that lion costume, and to align with his wishes and make him happy, I bravely took the risk of sneaking into the guest room in the middle of the night. This extraordinary measure of mine was indeed rewarded with great success. Eventually, my father returned from Tokyo and I overheard him loudly telling my mother from the children's room, "When I opened this notebook at the toy store, I saw lion dance written here. This isn't my handwriting." I wondered, and then realized, this is Yōzō's mischief. He was grinning and silent when I asked him, but later he must have desperately wanted that lion costume. He's quite a peculiar boy, after all. If he wanted it so much, he should have just said so. I laughed at the toy store. "Bring Yōzō here quickly." On the other hand, I gathered the male and female servants in the Western-style room and had one of the male servants play the piano keys chaotically. Though we lived in the countryside, the house was fairly well equipped, and I danced an Indian dance to his random tune, making everyone burst into laughter. My second brother took a flash photo of my Indian dance, and when I saw the developed photo, my small penis was showing from the seam of my loincloth, which was a Sarasa furoshiki, causing everyone in the house to laugh uproariously. This too was an unexpected success for me. Every month, I subscribed to more than 10 new children's magazines and quietly read various other books sent from Tokyo. I was quite familiar with characters like Dr. Makaku and Dr. Nanjimonya, and I was also well acquainted with ghost stories, lectures, Reikugo, and Edo Kabana. I never lacked material for amusing my family with humorous remarks delivered in a serious tone. But, oh, school. I was almost respected there. The idea of being respected frightened me tremendously. I felt that it was nearly equivalent to deceiving people completely and then being exposed by some all-knowing entity, leading to a disgrace worse than death. That was my definition of the state of being respected. Even if one deceives others and is respected, if just one person knows, and then others learn from that person that they have been deceived, what kind of anger and revenge would ensue from those people? Just imagining it sends chills down my spine. I thought I was gaining respect at school not because I was born into a wealthy family, but because of the so-called ability I displayed. I had been sickly since childhood, often bedridden for a month or even a school year, yet I still rode a rickshaw to school and took end-of-year exams, appearing to do better than anyone else in my class. Even when I was feeling well, I didn't study at all. I drew comics during class time and explained them to my classmates during breaks, making them laugh. I only wrote silly stories for my compositions, and even when the teacher scolded me, I didn't stop. I knew the teacher secretly looked forward to my silly stories. One day, I submitted an amusing anecdote about a time I had accidentally used the spit bucket in the train aisle as a toilet while traveling to Tokyo with my mother. Though I hadn't done it without knowing what it was, I had done it intentionally to play the innocent child. I wrote it with an exaggeratedly sad tone, confident the teacher would laugh. Following him quietly to the staff room, I saw him pull my composition from the stack of others, begin reading it while walking down the hall, chuckling softly, and then entering the staff room. After he finished reading, his face turned bright red as he burst into loud laughter and shared it with other teachers. I was immensely satisfied. I had succeeded in being seen as the so-called playful one. I had managed to escape being respected. My report cards all had perfect scores, but conduct scores were sometimes 7 or 6, which provided plenty of laughs throughout the house. However, my true nature was entirely the opposite of a playful person. By that time, I had already been taught and violated by the maids and servants. I now believe that committing such acts against children is one of the most disgusting, base, and cruel crimes a human can commit. Yet, I endured it. I even felt as though I had gained another insight into human nature, and I laughed weakly. Had I cultivated a habit of speaking the truth, I might have been able to report their crimes to my father or mother without shame, but I could not fully understand either of my parents. I had no expectations of human beings as a means of seeking help. Whether I appealed to my father, my mother, the police, or the government, I would likely only be bombarded with the favorable arguments of those who were strong in navigating society. I understood that there would always be shortcomings, and ultimately, seeking help from humans was futile. I felt I had no choice but to continue enduring without speaking the truth, continuing my antics. Are you expressing distrust toward humanity? Oh? When did you become a Christian? Some may mock, but I believe distrust toward humanity does not necessarily lead to a religious path. In fact, even the people who mock, including themselves, live comfortably without any thought of Jehovah, all within mutual distrust. Still, reflecting on my childhood, there was a famous politician from the party my father belonged to who came to give a speech in this town, and I went to listen at the theater with the servants. It was packed, and I could see the faces of those particularly close to my father, who were applauding vigorously. After the speech, the audience scattered into the snowy night, discussing the event disparagingly. Among them were voices of those particularly close to my father, criticizing the opening remarks in the well-known politician's speech, saying they couldn't make heads or tails of it, all in a tone resembling anger. These same people stopped by our house and, with seemingly sincere and happy faces, told my father that the speech had been a great success. Even the servants, when asked by my mother how the speech had gone, replied that it was very interesting, appearing unfazed. On the way home, the servants were lamenting that nothing was less interesting than a speech. However, this is merely a trivial example. It seems that in human life, there is an abundance of instances of mutual deception, where everyone remains oddly unscathed, and they don't even realize they are deceiving each other. But I have little special interest in the act of deceiving one another. I too have been deceiving people all day long through my antics. I have little interest in morality, which is typically described in textbooks on ethics. I find it perplexing that some people can live cheerfully and confidently while deceiving one another. In the end, no one taught me that mystery. If I had understood it, I might not have lived in such fear of humanity or have felt the need to serve desperately. I could have avoided the hellish suffering I have endured at night. Thus, I believe I did not report the despicable crimes of the servants because of distrust toward humanity, nor, of course, because of Christianity, but rather because humanity had tightly shut the door on me from the beginning. Even my parents occasionally revealed things that were difficult for me to understand. And I feel that the scent of my loneliness, which I did not express to anyone, was instinctively detected by many women, and in later years, it became one of the many inducements through which I was exploited. In other words, I was a man capable of keeping the secrets of love for women,